There is a version of every person that the world never sees. It sits behind the eyes during a job interview, behind the smile at a family dinner, behind the calm voice on a first date. We call it many things: restraint, professionalism, manners. But underneath all of those light words is something simpler and a little uncomfortable to say out loud. It is a mask, and almost nobody admits to wearing one, which is exactly why it works. This is not a video about deception for its own sake. It is a video about something far more useful: understanding the actual machinery of human behavior, the part that runs quietly underneath the version of life we present to each other. Once you can see that machinery, you stop being confused by people. You stop being blindsided by colleagues, by lovers, by friends who turn out to want something you didn't expect. You start to understand why some people walk into a room and own it without raising their voice, while others can talk for an hour and leave no impression at all. The difference is rarely intelligence. It is almost never luck. It is a set of skills that nobody teaches you in school, because admitting they exist makes people uncomfortable. So let's start where it actually starts. Not with strategy, not with manipulation, with a feeling. Ask yourself when you last felt truly powerless. Maybe it was a manager who dismissed your idea in a meeting without even looking up. Maybe it was a partner who could make you feel small with a single sentence. Maybe it was simply watching your own life move in a direction you never chose, while you stood there unable to redirect it. That feeling, the inability to influence the events and people around you, is one of the most corrosive emotions a human being can carry. It doesn't just make you sad. Over time, it makes you bitter, passive-aggressive, resentful, in ways you don't even notice in yourself. People who feel chronically powerless don't become calm. They become strange. They start playing small, ugly games to claw back even an inch of control, because the alternative, accepting that they have none, is unbearable. Power in its most honest definition is simply the opposite of that feeling. It is the sense that you can move your own life in the direction you intend, and that the people around you are not simply acting on you, but responding to you. That's it. It has nothing to do with thrones, boardrooms, or armies, although those are the places where the same psychological forces show up in their most exaggerated form. The same dynamic exists at a dinner table, in a group chat, in a marriage, in a Sunday afternoon argument about where to eat. Wherever two or more people are gathered, the question of who is steering and who is being steered is always running quietly in the background, whether anyone admits it or not. This is precisely why so many people walk into adulthood and feel ambushed. Most of us are raised on stories with clean moral lines: be honest, be kind, work hard, and good things will follow. Then we step into a workplace, or a relationship, or a friend group, and discover an entirely different operating system running underneath the official one. People take credit quietly. People smile at you while undermining you to someone else. People reward confidence over competence, and image over substance, far more often than we were told they would. The shock of that discovery breaks some people. It turns them cynical, withdrawn, or worse, makes them easy prey for the more practiced operators around them. The goal here is not to make you cynical. It is to make you so aware of the actual rules of the game that you are never blindsided by them. Again, to understand power, you first have to understand the self, specifically the gap between the self you experience privately and the self you perform publicly. This gap is not a flaw in human character. It is the foundation of civilization itself. Imagine for a moment a world without it, a world where every person said exactly what they thought, the instant they thought it, with zero filtering. That world wouldn't run for more than a day. Marriages would end over breakfast. Companies would collapse in a single meeting. Friendships would dissolve the first time someone admitted they found a friend's power. Unflattering, the mask, the social performance, the careful management of what we reveal, these are not corruptions of human nature. They are the very thing that allows large groups of self-interested animals to live, work, and build things together without tearing each other apart. History is full of people who understood this instinctively and built entire eras around it. In the royal courts of 17th century Europe, survival depended on an almost theatrical command of one's expressions. A courtier who let his irritation show on his face in front of the wrong noble could lose his land, his title, sometimes his head. So an entire culture of performance emerged. Manuals were written on how to control your face, your posture, your tone, depending on who stood in front of you. We look back on that as excessive, even absurd. But strip away the powdered wigs and the velvet, and you will recognize the exact same behavior in any modern office. The employee who learns to look calm in front of a hostile executive, who learns when to speak and when to simply nod, is running the same software the courtiers were running 400 years ago. The stakes are smaller. The mechanism is identical. Here is the part most people get wrong though, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Wearing a mask in public life is not the same as losing yourself. Danger isn't in performing a role when the moment calls for it. Calm under pressure, polished in an interview, diplomatic with a difficult relative. The danger is in forgetting that it's a performance at all. Psychologists who study identity have long pointed out that the healthiest people are the ones who can move fluidly between their public role and their private self, the way an actor can play a villain on stage and go home to walk the dog without confusion about which one is real. The unhealthy version is the person who either refuses to perform at all, blurting out every unfiltered thought and wondering why people keep their distance, or the person who performs so unfiltered constantly that they lose track of who they are when no one is watching. Both extremes are forms of the same failure, an inability to hold the public self and the private self as two separate, coexisting truths. You can see this failure play out constantly in people whose entire identity becomes their job, title, their public image, or their social media persona. Take away the audience, and there is nothing left underneath. No private self that was simply waiting, intact, for the performance to end. That is a genuinely fragile way to live, because your sense of self becomes entirely dependent on continued applause. A person who is more resilient, more genuinely powerful, is the one who can step fully into a public role when required, and just as fully step out of it the moment the door closes. They have a self underneath the performance. That self is the actual source of their stability, and, in a roundabout way, source of their power, because people can sense when someone is not desperately performing for their approval. Now, here's a piece of this machine that tends to make people uncomfortable, because it cuts directly against everything we're taught about loyalty. The world of getting things done is not the same world as the world of friendship. And confusing the two is one of the most reliable ways to damage both. Picture a small business owner who needs to hire someone for a critical role. Their mind goes immediately to a close friend, someone they trust, someone comfortable, someone who already knows their sense of humor. It feels like the safe choice. It is very often the costly one, because the moment a friendship and a working relationship are fused together, every disagreement carries emotional weight it shouldn't have to carry. A piece of critical feedback that would be delivered cleanly to a stranger becomes loaded with guilt and history when delivered to a friend. Mediocre work that would be addressed immediately in a normal employee gets quietly tolerated for months because confronting it feels like a betrayal of the relationship. Eventually, the business suffers, the friendship sours anyway, and the worst outcome occurs. You lose both the working relationship and the friendship at once. This doesn't mean you should never work with people you like, or that warmth has no place in professional life. It means you should be conscious of which mode you're operating in at any given moment, and not let one contaminate the other by accident. The most capable operators in any field tend to keep a clear internal line between people I trust with my heart and people I trust with this particular task, and they understand those two categories can overlap, but they are not the same category. And pretending otherwise is where the damage happens. There's an even more counterintuitive move hiding inside this same principle, and it's one of the most underused tools in any kind of negotiation, leadership, or relationship repair. Turning a rival into an ally is often more powerful than recruiting a friend. Think about the psychology involved. A person who has clashed with you, who expects continued friction, who has mentally filed you under opponent, experiences something genuinely disarming when you approach them with respect instead of more conflict. Brain registers it almost as a small shock. This person was supposed to be against me, and instead they're offering me something. That shock tends to produce loyalty far stronger than the loyalty of someone who liked you from the start and simply continued liking you. You converted them. And people are strangely devoted to the version of themselves that changed their mind about another person, because admitting they were wrong and then being rewarded for it feels good. This is why some of history's most effective political operators made a habit of publicly elevating former opponents rather than crushing them, not from saintliness, but because a converted rival is often a more loyal asset than an old friend who never had to choose you. This brings us to a tension that almost everyone wrestles with at some point and rarely resolves cleanly. How much of your plans, your ambitions, your next move should you actually reveal to the people around you? There are two camps, and both are partly right, which is exactly why the question feels so unresolved. One camp insists you should share your vision as widely and openly as possible, because people rally around a mission they understand, and secrecy breeds suspicion. The other camp insists you should hold your cards close, because every plan you announce out loud is a plan your competitors, your rivals, or simply the more opportunistic people around you can now prepare a response to. The honest answer is that both camps are right in different rooms. When you're building something with people who are genuinely on your side, a team, a family, a small group working toward a shared outcome, transparency is fuel. People commit harder to a mission they can see clearly, and pulling back information from your phone allies breeds the exact paranoia you were trying to avoid. But the moment you step outside that circle of genuine allies into a competitive environment where other parties have their own interests that may directly conflict with yours, openness becomes a liability. A negotiation where you reveal your walk-away point before the other side reveals theirs is not a negotiation, it's a gift. A business plan announced too early to a market full of faster-moving competitors is not vision sharing, it's a head start handed to someone else. The skill is not choosing one approach forever. Skill is reading the room correctly each time, and recognizing that the same openness that builds loyalty inside your circle can be exploited the instant it leaves it. Now we arrive at the part of this conversation that tends to make people squirm the most, because it requires turning the lens back on ourselves. It would be very comfortable to discuss all of this as something other people do. The manipulators, the office politicians, the difficult exes. The uncomfortable truth sitting underneath everything we've covered so far is this. There is no one walking around without a shadow side. Not the most admired humanitarian in your country's history. Not the kindest person in your family. Not you. This isn't a cynical claim about human evil. It's a structural one. Every human being who has ever lived was shaped by some degree of unmet need in childhood. A moment, however small, the unconditional love and attention they wanted didn't fully arrive. They had to find some way to compensate for the gap on their own. Developmental psychologists have spent decades mapping exactly how this works. A small child who experiences consistent warmth and security develops a stable internal sense of self-worth, a kind of inner reservoir they can draw on later in life when the world is unkind to them. A child who experiences neglect, inconsistency, or a parent too overwhelmed to provide steady attention has to build that reservoir some other way, usually by turning inward and constructing a private narrative of self-worth that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. That can look healthy from a distance. It can also curdle later in life, into something closer to what we'd call narcissism, an inability to tolerate criticism, an outsized need to be the center of every room, a tendency to react to any perceived slight, not with hurt, but with rage, because there is no inner reservoir of stable self-esteem to absorb the blow. The instinct, when hearing this, is to immediately sort people into categories. Narcissists, over there, healthy people over here. Resist that instinct. Every single person carries some version of this dynamic, because every single person experienced some degree of imperfect parenting, because perfect parenting does not exist and never has. Differences between people are differences of degree, not of kind. The person who insists, with total confidence, they have absolutely no trace of self-absorption, no defensive triggers, no wounded places, that person is not healthier than everyone else. They are simply less aware of their own machinery, which, ironically, makes them more dangerous to be around, not less, because unexamined wounds tend to leak out sideways in ways their owner never sees coming. The single most useful move you can make here is not eliminating your shadow side. It's not actually possible, but developing a working relationship with it. The goal is to know your own triggers well enough that when they fire, you can recognize what's happening in real time, rather than being swept along by it and calling the resulting behavior just who I am. A person who knows they tend to react defensively to criticism can catch themselves mid-reaction and pause before responding. A person who knows they crave being the center of attention can recognize that craving as a craving, rather than mistaking it for an objective read on how interesting they actually are in any given moment. This single habit, catching the shadow side in motion, rather than being run by it unconsciously, is one of the most reliable markers, separating people who grow more capable with age from people who simply become more rigid, more brittle versions of their younger selves. And here is the strange twist that most people never expect. The very same wounds that create a fragile, reactive shadow self can also be the raw material for the most magnetic, charismatic qualities a person can possess, if the energy gets redirected rather than denied. Consider the historical pattern visible across countless figures who rose to extraordinary influence, not despite difficult, deprived, or unstable childhoods, but in some strange way because of them. A child who never received easy, automatic attention learns, often without realizing it, to study people with unusual intensity, because their survival depended on reading the room correctly. That same hyper-attentiveness, redirected in adulthood, can become a genuinely rare gift for understanding what other people need before they say it. The energy that could have curdled entirely into bitterness or self-pity instead becomes the fuel behind extraordinary drive, extraordinary output, and almost desperate need to build something undeniable. Plenty of people who grew up with comfortable, stable, uneventful childhoods never developed that same hunger, because they never needed to. There is no formula here, and difficulty is not a guarantee of greatness. Most people who suffer simply suffer. The pattern is real enough and common enough across history that it's worth naming. Your wound is not only a liability waiting to be managed. It can be redirected into the very thing that makes you formidable, if you're honest enough with yourself to see it clearly, instead of pretending it isn't there. There's another current running beneath almost every group of people, and it's one most of us are trained to deny we even notice. Status. Not status in the crude sense of money or titles, but the constant, low-level positioning that happens whenever more than one person occupies a room. Watch any group of friends order food at a restaurant. Someone will, almost without thinking, take charge of the conversation with the waiter. Someone else will defer instinctively, letting the first person's choice stand in for their own. Watch a family gathering and you'll see the same dynamic in sharper relief. Certain relatives, whose opinions seem to settle a debate the moment they're voiced, and others, whose opinions, even when objectively reasonable, seem to evaporate the moment they're spoken. None of this is conscious. and very little of it is fair. It is simply the residue of a status hierarchy that every group of humans builds, usually within the first few minutes of forming, whether the group is a friendship circle, a sports team, or a corporate department. The reason this matters is that status is constantly being negotiated through behavior that looks, on the surface, like something else entirely. A coworker who interrupts you mid-sentence in a meeting is not simply being rude. They are testing whether your position in the group's hierarchy allows you to push back, or whether you lake. It's Siskwer. Now we're to study a friend who casually mentions a recent promotion, a new car, or an impressive trip, dropped into conversation with studied casualness, is not simply sharing news. They are quietly recalibrating where they sit relative to you. None of this makes people villains. It makes them human, running an ancient piece of software that exists in every primate troop on the planet, ours included. The skill worth developing is not paranoia about every interaction, but the ability to notice status moves as they happen, so that you're never unconsciously ceding ground in 100 small exchanges, without realizing what's actually being negotiated underneath the friendly tone of voice. Envy deserves its own honest mention here, because it is one of the most disguised emotions in the entire human repertoire, and almost nobody will admit to feeling it even as it's actively shaping their behavior. Envy rarely announces itself as envy. It shows up wearing other costumes. Sudden, oddly specific criticism of someone's success, compliment delivered with just enough hesitation to undercut it, strange coolness toward a friend right after they share good news. If you've ever told a piece of exciting news to someone and felt the temperature in the room drop slightly, you felt envy operating in real time, even if neither of you would ever call it that out loud. The useful move here isn't to become suspicious of everyone who reacts oddly to your success. Most people manage their envy quietly and decently. It's to recognize the pattern when it appears, so you're not blindsided into thinking you did something wrong simply because someone close to you responded to your good fortune with unexpected coldness. Their reaction is rarely about you. It's about the uncomfortable comparison your news forced them to make against their own life, in a moment they didn't choose and couldn't fully control. All of this connects back to the central theme of this channel, the one hiding in its very name. People behave differently when they believe they are being watched than when they believe they are not. This is not a flaw limited to dishonest people. It is a universal feature of social cognition. Studies on this exact phenomenon have found that something as simple as a poster with a pair of eyes on it, placed near an honesty box in a break room, measurably increases how much money people leave behind, even though everyone involved would insist, if asked, that a poster has no real bearing on their personal ethics. We are, all of us, performing slightly differently depending on our sense of audience. And the more invisible the audience feels, the more the performance drops away, and something closer to the unfiltered self comes through. This is precisely why so much of what's genuinely true about a person reveals itself not in their public statements, but in the small, private moments. How someone treats a waiter when they think it doesn't matter. How someone behaves in traffic when they believe no one who knows them is watching. What someone says about a friend the moment that friend leaves the room. Behind closed doors is not just the name of a channel. It is the actual location where the truth about people tends to live, because that is where the audience effect finally switches off. One more hidden force deserves attention before we close this half of the conversation, because it is quietly responsible for an enormous amount of human decision-making that people insist, when asked directly, is purely a matter of their own free choice. Pull of obligation. Human beings carry an almost involuntary internal ledger that tracks favors, gifts, and kindnesses, given and received. And that ledger generates real psychological discomfort when it falls out of balance. Receive an unsolicited gift, a favor, a generous gesture, and something in you will keep quietly searching for a way to even the score, often well past the point where the original giver has even forgotten the gesture themselves. This is not weakness. It is one of the oldest cooperative instincts we carry. The same instinct that allowed small bands of early humans to survive by trading help back and forth in a world without contracts or money to formalize the exchange. The trouble is that this instinct can be activated deliberately, and once you know to look for it, you'll start noticing how often it is. The unsolicited small gift before a larger ask. The unrequested favor performed conspicuously, just before a request that would otherwise be difficult to make. The generous first offer in a negotiation, immediately followed by a request for a concession, which now feels almost rude to refuse given how generous the other side has just appeared to be. None of this requires villainy to operate. Most people who use small gestures of generosity to grease the wheels of a later request aren't doing so with cold calculation. They've simply absorbed the way most social skills are absorbed. That warmth given first tends to produce compliance later. The corrective isn't refusing every kindness out of suspicion, which would make you exhausting to be around and rob you of the genuine warmth still present in most ordinary exchanges. It's simply knowing the mechanism exists, so that when you do feel that quiet pull to repay an unbalanced ledger, you can ask yourself honestly whether you're responding to genuine goodwill or to a debt that was manufactured specifically to be called in later. There's a final piece of this machinery worth naming before we move into the second half of this conversation, because it sits at the intersection of everything we've covered so far: the comfort trap. Human beings are wired to extend trust based on familiarity, not based on evidence. The brain treats "I have known this person a long time" as nearly interchangeable with "this person has earned my trust," even though the two things have almost nothing to do with each other. You can know someone for 20 years and never once have tested whether they've tell you an inconvenient truth, defend you when you're not in the room, or keep a confidence under real pressure. Familiarity simply means repeated exposure. It says nothing about character. Yet most people hand out their deepest trust almost entirely on the basis of how long they've lured and how comfortable that person makes them feel, rather than on any actual track record of behavior under difficulty. This matters because the people who are best at extracting advantage from others, and to be clear, this includes ordinary, otherwise decent people in ordinary, otherwise decent situations, not just the dramatic villains we picture, understand the comfort trap intuitively, even if they've never named it. They know that consistent warmth, charm, and familiarity will eventually produce trust, whether or not that trust has been tested by anything real. This is precisely how otherwise intelligent people end up loaning money they never see again, entering business deals with people who turn out to have no real competence behind their charisma, or staying in relationships that quietly cost them more than they receive, simply because the relationship felt familiar and warm for long enough that questioning it started to feel like a betrayal of the comfort itself. The corrective here isn't suspicion of everyone you get. That would be its own kind of damage. A permanent posture of defensiveness that poisons the very relationships that make life worth living. The corrective is simpler and more specific. Notice when your sense of trust in someone is based on a real track record of tested behavior. Notice when it's based purely on the accumulated comfort of familiarity. The two can certainly coexist in the same person, and often do in your genuinely good relationships. When they don't coexist, when someone has provided years of warmth and charm but has never actually been tested by an inconvenient truth, a moment of real difficulty, or a situation where lying would have been easier than honesty, that's worth noticing, quietly, without necessarily acting on it. Awareness is not accusation, simply keeping an accurate internal ledger, rather than the comfortable, inflated one most of us keep by default. This is where the first half of this conversation has to pause and let something settle. We've established that the mask is not a betrayal of authenticity, but the mechanism that makes social life possible at all. We've established that confusing friendship with strategic alliance quietly damages both. We've established that secrecy and openness are tools to be selected based on whose peril actually in the room, not fixed virtues. We've established that every person alive is carrying some version of an unhealed place, and that the goal is never to eliminate it, only to know it well enough that it stops running the show without your permission. What comes next is where this gets genuinely useful in the parts of life most people care about most: attraction, influence, confidence, and the strange, almost involuntary language the body speaks, whether you want it to or not. Because once you understand the architecture we've just laid out, the mask, the shadow, the difference between performance and authenticity, you are finally equipped to understand why some people seem to draw others toward them effortlessly, while other people, often working twice as hard, can't seem to generate the same pull no matter what they try. That is where we are headed next. We left the first half of this conversation with a simple but uncomfortable idea. Nearly everyone is performing some version of a role. Nearly everyone is carrying some version of an unhealed wound, and the truest version of a person tends to surface only in the moments when they believe no one is watching. Now we turn to the place where all of that machinery becomes most visible, most consequential, and frankly, most personal, the world of attraction, influence, and the strange, magnetic pull that some people seem to generate effortlessly, while others, working twice as hard, can't seem to generate it at all. Start with a distinction that almost nobody makes correctly, because the culture hands us a cartoon version of influence and calls it the whole picture. We tend to imagine a seducer, in the romantic sense or in the broader sense of someone who draws others toward them, as someone cold, calculating, extracting something from another person while giving nothing real in return. That version exists, certainly, and it tends to leave a trail of damage behind it. But it is not actually the most effective version, and it's worth understanding why, because the difference matters far beyond romance. Cold version of influence is fundamentally extractive. It treats the other person as a problem to be solved, target to be moved from point A to point B, using the right combination of words and tactics. It can work in the short term, particularly on people who are lonely, inexperienced, or simply unaware that they're being handled. But it tends to collapse the moment real intimacy is required, because extraction and intimacy are opposites. You cannot deeply know someone while simultaneously treating them as a means to an end, and people, even when they can't articulate exactly what feels wrong, generally sense the difference eventually. The warmer, more durable version of influence works almost entirely differently. It starts with a single move that sounds almost too simple to be powerful. Genuine attention, not performed attention, not the kind of nodding while thinking about something else. It passes for listening in most conversations, but the real, effortful work of actually entering another person's interior world, what they're missing, what they're proud of, what they're quietly insecure about, what they wish someone would notice without having to ask. Most people move through their days almost entirely unseen in this way. They are surrounded by other people, often constantly, and almost none of those people are actually paying attention to who they specifically are, as opposed to what role they're currently playing. Coworker, cashier, acquaintance, name on a screen. When someone breaks that pattern, when someone actually notices the specific, particular thing that makes another person who they are, rather than treating them as an interchangeable extra in their own life, the effect is almost disproportionate to how little effort it actually requires. People do not forget being truly seen. It is rare enough that it registers as remarkable. This requires a specific kind of internal posture that is much harder to maintain than it sounds, turning your attention outward instead of inward. Picture the difference between two people walking into the same social situation. A party, first date, an important meeting. The first person spends the entire encounter running an internal monologue. Am I making a good impression? Did that sound stupid? Do they like me? What should I say next to sound interesting? Every ounce of their attention is consumed by self-monitoring. which means almost none of it is actually available to perceive the other person sitting in front of them. The second person has simply switched that monitoring off, or at least turned its volume down enough that their attention is free to actually land on the other human being in the room. Their tone, what lights up when they talk about something they care about, but they're not quite saying directly. This second posture is what creates the felt experience other people describe as charisma, presence, or magnetism. It isn't a trick. It's simply attention, redirected outward instead of trapped in a closed loop of self-evaluation. This distinction also explains why insecurity is so reliably unattractive, while vulnerability, its close cousin, is so reliably the opposite. The two get confused constantly, and the confusion causes real damage, so it's worth being precise. Insecurity is inward-facing. It is the part of a person that is so consumed with managing their own anxiety about how they're being perceived that there is no real attention left over for anyone else. You can feel it across a table. The slightly too quick laughter, the fishing for reassurance, the conversation that keeps circling back, however subtly, to, "Was that okay? Do you like me? Did I do well?" Creates discomfort in the other person, almost like a kind of second-hand anxiety, because humans are exquisitely good at detecting when someone's attention is actually elsewhere, locked inside their own head, even while their mouth is technically still talking to you. Vulnerability is something else entirely. Vulnerability is outward-facing. It is the willingness to let another person see something real and unguarded about you. A genuine opinion that might be unpopular. An honest admission of not knowing something. A real reaction instead of a managed one. Without that admission being driven by a desperate need for reassurance. It says, "Here is something true about me, and I am secure enough to let you see it without needing you to immediately validate it." This is precisely why people are drawn to softness in others, to admissions of fear or uncertainty, to the small moments where someone drops the polished version of themselves. But only when that softness comes from a place of underlying stability, rather than a place of need. Person who has absolutely no visible vulnerability at all, who is armored and controlled in every interaction with zero cracks showing, tends to read as unsettling rather than impressive, because total invulnerability doesn't feel like strength to the people around it. It feels like distance, or worse, like something being concealed. We are drawn to the soft underbelly of a creature that is otherwise clearly strong enough to survive without our help. That combination, strength with an honest crack in it, is one of the most consistently magnetic qualities a person can display, and it cannot be faked, because the moment vulnerability is performed for effect rather than genuinely felt, it curdles back into something closer to manipulation, and people sense that shift almost instantly. There is also a category of behavior worth naming plainly, because it quietly undermines more relationships, dates, and friendships than almost anything else, and it rarely gets identified for what it is. Moral posturing. This is the habit of asserting your own ethical or intellectual superiority in a moment that calls for warmth instead, correcting someone's opinion unprompted, signaling disapproval of a choice that was none of your business, making someone feel slightly smaller so that you can feel slightly larger by comparison. It often disguises itself as honesty, or principle, or simply calling things as I see them. But the effect it produces in another person is almost always the same: a quiet retreat, closing, rather than an opening. Nobody feels drawn towards someone who is busy demonstrating how much better, smarter, or more enlightened they are. Warmth requires a kind of equality in the room, a sense that both people are simply present, together without one of them quietly auditing the other's worth. The moment that equality breaks, so does the attraction, regardless of how objectively right the corrective comment happened to be. Generosity belongs in this same conversation, and not in the narrow sense of money, although money is certainly part of it. The deeper form of generosity that actually moves people is generosity of attention and effort, the visible willingness to put thought, time, and care into another person, rather than defaulting to whatever requires the least from you. A person who plans something specific and considered, who remembers a small detail mentioned weeks earlier and brings it back up, who is simply willing to go slightly out of their way, signals something important. You mattered enough for me to spend real resources on you, not just leftover time and convenience. The opposite, the visible cutting of corners, the unwillingness to extend even modest effort, signals the reverse just as clearly, often more loudly than the person extending so little effort ever intends. People read effort as a direct translation of how much they actually matter, and they are usually right too. None of this works, however, without the one ingredient that underwrites everything we've just described: genuine confidence, as opposed to its much more common cousin, performed confidence. And here we have to be honest about something uncomfortable, because most advice on this subject skips directly to the symptoms. Stand taller, make more eye contact, speak more slowly, without addressing the actual source. Confidence cannot be faked convincingly for more than a few minutes, because it isn't primarily expressed through words or even posture. It leaks through dozens of small, largely involuntary signals: the slight tightness in a voice under pressure, the speed of speech when someone feels cornered, the micro-hesitations that appear right before an answer that isn't unfully believed by the person giving it. Other people, especially people who have spent a lifetime needing to read intentions accurately for their own safety, pick these signals up below the level of conscious awareness. They might not be able to say exactly why a person felt unconvincing. They simply felt it, and they were usually right. Real confidence, kind that doesn't leak and doesn't need to be maintained through constant effort, is built from one source only: an accurate internal record of demonstrated competence. Not borrowed competence. Not competence you've read about or aspire to. Things you have actually done, repeatedly, well enough that the evidence is undeniable, even to your own most critical inner voice. This is why confidence is so difficult to access early in any pursuit. There simply isn't a track record yet to draw on. And any confidence displayed at that stage is by necessity a kind of advance on a loan that hasn't been earned. Some people can carry that advance gracefully for a while, especially if they have some other genuine asset to lean on in the meantime. But the sustainable version, the version that holds up under real pressure and doesn't collapse the first time it's seriously tested, comes only from accumulated, demonstrated proof that you can do the thing you're claiming you can do. There is no shortcut around this. The discomfort of being unproven is not a problem to be talked away with affirmations. It is a temporary condition to be resolved through the unglamorous, repetitive work of actually becoming good at something. This single fact reframes the entire conversation around confidence in a more useful direction. Instead of asking, how do I feel more confident, the better question is, what have I actually built that I could legitimately feel confident about? The feeling follows the evidence. It almost never works the other way around for very long. All of this, the attention, the vulnerability, the confidence, gets communicated through a channel most people never consciously study, even though it's running constantly and revealing far more than the words layered on top of it. The body. Long before humans had language sophisticated enough to lie with, we had bodies that could not lie nearly as effectively, and an enormous amount of our evolutionary survival depended on reading those bodies correctly. A group of early humans that misjudged whether an approaching stranger meant harm or friendship paid for that mistake with their lives. So the skill of reading posture, tension, gaze, and gesture was selected for with brutal efficiency over a very long stretch of time, which is why it still operates so powerfully in us today, largely below conscious awareness. Consider how reliably the body betrays what words are actively trying to conceal. A genuine smile recruits muscles around the eyes, that are almost impossible to consciously bruise. The slight crinkling at the corners that produces what researchers call a real, fully engaged expression. Performed smile, the kind delivered out of politeness rather than actual feeling, tends to stay isolated in the mouth, with the eyes remaining comparatively still and unmoved. Most people cannot name this distinction explicitly, yet they register it instantly and, somewhat unconsciously, file the smile as either trustworthy or slightly off, without quite knowing why. Voice carries a similarly involuntary signature. Speech that accelerates under pressure. A subtle tightening of pitch when someone feels cornered. The stable, unhurried cadence that tends to accompany someone who is genuinely at ease. None of these signals can be reliably faked over any extended period because they aren't primarily produced by conscious thought. They're produced by the nervous system's actual state, leaking outward whether the speaker intends it to or not. Posture carries its own quiet vocabulary. In any room with an obvious hierarchy, watch how the people lower in that hierarchy tend to lean forward, take up less physical space, and angle their bodies slightly toward whoever holds more authority, while the person at the top of that hierarchy tends to occupy more space and lean back, signaling, often without any conscious intention, they don't need to chase anyone's attention because attention naturally comes to them. Watch feet, specifically. In any standing conversation, they are one of the most honest parts of the body, precisely because almost nobody thinks to manage them. A person whose feet remain angled toward you throughout a conversation is genuinely engaged. A person whose feet have quietly rotated toward the nearest exit, even while their face remains politely engaged and their mouth keeps contributing to the conversation, has already left the conversation in every way that matters except the literal one. The instinct, on hearing all of this, is to try to consciously monitor every one of these signals in real time, your own posture, your own voice, your own feet, simultaneously trying to also read all of the same signals in the other person. This is both exhausting and, more importantly, counterproductive, because a person visibly straining to manage their own body language reads as exactly that. Strained, self-conscious, and slightly off, the very opposite of the natural ease they were trying to project. The actual solution is simpler and harder at the same time. Address the underlying state rather than the surface symptoms. A person who is genuinely secure, genuinely paying attention outward rather than inward, will produce calm, congruent body language, automatically, without having to manage a single gesture consciously. You cannot reliably fake the output. You can only build the underlying state and let the output take care of itself. Reading other people's body language, meanwhile, is a far more learnable skill than managing your own, precisely because it's an observational task rather than a self-monitoring one, and it improves steadily with deliberate attention over time. This is worth treating as an actual practice, rather than a passive hope that you deluve right, negati, man. Watch conversations happening near you, in cafes, on public transport, purely as a study of posture, gesture, and tone, entirely separate from whatever words happen to be involved. Notice the gap, when it appears, between what someone is saying and what their body is simultaneously communicating. That gap, once you start noticing it reliably, becomes one of the single most valuable pieces of awareness information available in any human interaction, because words can be planned and rehearsed in advance, while the body, in the moment, generally cannot. This naturally leads to a question almost everyone wants answered directly. How do you actually tell when someone is lying to you? The honest answer disappoints people who want a single reliable tell, a shifty gaze, a touched nose, the classic signs handed down through pop culture, because none of those individual signs hold up particularly well under careful study. Some confident liars maintain perfect eye contact. Some anxious, entirely honest people avoid it constantly simply because they're naturally uncomfortable in conversation. Looking for one isolated signal is close to useless. What actually works is something less dramatic and considerably more reliable, watching for inconsistency and watching for cognitive load. Honest accounts of real events tend to be told the same way regardless of when you ask, because the person is simply describing something they actually remember. Fabricated accounts, by contrast, are constructions rather than memories, and constructions tend to shift subtly each time they're rebuilt, small details changing, the order of events rearranging slightly, new specifics appearing that weren't mentioned the first time. If you ever have reason to ask someone to recount the same story twice, separated by enough time that they can't simply repeat a rehearsed version verbatim, listen less for what stays the same and more for what quietly moves. Cognitive load is the second, more subtle signal, and it's rooted in something almost mechanical about how the brain operates. Telling the truth about something you remember requires very little mental effort. You simply retrieve and report. Constructing a lie requires simultaneously inventing a plausible account, tracking whether it remains consistent with everything you've already said, monitoring the other person's reaction for signs of suspicion, and maintaining a convincing tone and expression throughout, all at once. That is a genuinely heavier cognitive task, and it tends to produce visible strain under the right conditions. Slightly longer pauses before answering unexpected follow-up questions, a noticeable difficulty when asked to describe events out of their normal chronological order, a kind of effortfulness that sits underneath an otherwise smooth delivery. None of this is proof in any single instance. People pause for all kinds of innocent reasons. Treating every hesitation as evidence of dishonesty will make you both wrong and unbearable to talk to. But as a pattern, observed over time and across multiple conversations with the same person, inconsistency and unusual cognitive strain remain two of the most genuinely useful signals available, far more useful than any single dramatic tell borrowed from a crime drama. We end, finally, where all of this has to end, if any of it is going to matter beyond a single conversation, single date, single negotiation, with the question of what you actually build your life around. Because none of the skills we find covered mean very much without something substantial underneath them. Confidence requires a track record. A track record requires sustained effort in some specific direction, repeated over years rather than weeks. This is the discipline the culture is currently worst at teaching, because it conflicts directly with an environment engineered to deliver small rewards instantly and constantly. Every notification, every scroll, every quick hit of approval trains the brain to expect outcomes immediately, which makes the slow, often boring accumulation of real skill feel almost unbearable by comparison. The brain itself does not run on the same schedule as a notification feed, and it never will, because it is far older than any of the technology currently demanding its attention. Skill is built through repetition, full stop, through the literal strengthening of neural pathways, every time an action is performed again, with attention, under conditions that gradually increase in difficulty. There is no way to compress this process meaningfully. The musician who can improvise something genuinely new and surprising has done so only after thousands of unglamorous hours spent on material that wasn't new or surprising at all. Scales, repetition, the same difficult passage played wrong, then slightly less wrong, then finally right, 10,000 times over. The early stage of any serious pursuit is almost without exception boring. This is not a sign that you've chosen the wrong path. It is simply what the early stage of mastering anything difficult actually feels like. And the people who eventually become extraordinary at something are not the ones who found a way to skip that stage. They are the ones who tolerated it long enough for the brain to finish doing its slow, invisible work underneath the surface. The practical question then, especially for anyone early in a career or a craft, is not, how do I find my one true passion? A phrase that creates more anxiety than clarity, because it implies a single correct answer waiting to be discovered, and a corresponding fear of choosing wrong. A more useful question is simply, what activity, when you were younger and less self-conscious about it, felt like a natural extension of who you were, rather than a performance you had to maintain? That feeling, not passion exactly, something closer to fit, is worth taking seriously as a direction, even if it isn't yet a fully formed plan. Once you have some direction, the early years matter enormously. They are routinely wasted by a single, very understandable mistake: optimizing for the highest salary instead of the highest rate of learning. Position inside a large, established organization often pays better immediately, frequently offers less direct responsibility, more layers of bureaucracy between you and any real decision, and a much slower rate of genuine skill development. Smaller, scrappier environment, often paying considerably less, tends to hand you responsibility far beyond your experience level, simply because there's no one else available to take it. That mismatch between responsibility and readiness is uncomfortable, occasionally even a little frightening, but it is also precisely the condition under which skill accumulates fastest, because you are forced to actually do the thing repeatedly under real consequences, rather than observing someone else do it from a comfortable distance. The years in your 20s and early 30s spent inside that kind of uncomfortable, accelerated environment tend to pay dividends for decades afterward, in a way that a marginally larger early paycheck simply cannot match. Inside that early environment, there is a specific skill worth practicing deliberately, and it has nothing to do with technical competence at first. It has to do with how you spend your time in the tension in the first few months of any new role. The instinctive move, for almost everyone, is to spend that early period trying to be liked, trying to prove yourself, trying to impress the people around you as quickly as possible. That instinct is almost exactly backwards. The early period of any new environment is the only window you'll ever get where your ignorance is fully forgiven and your observation is genuinely fresh. You can watch the unwritten rules of the place, the actual power structure, as opposed to the official one on the org chart. The specific habits and judgment calls that separate the people who are quietly excellent from the other people who are simply present, all without anyone expecting you to have an opinion yet. Spend that window proving yourself instead of studying the environment, and you'll have burned the one period where careful observation was free, in exchange for an impression that nobody will remember in 6 months anyway. People who advance fastest in any apprenticeship, in any field, are disproportionately ones who spent their early period as a quiet student of the entire system around them, rather than as an eager performer trying to prove they belonged there before they'd actually earned it. None of what we've covered across this entire conversation, the mask, the shadow, the comfort trap, vulnerability, confidence, the silent language of the body, the slow architecture of mastery, is meant to leave you suspicious of the people around you, or cynical about human connection itself. It's meant to do something closer to the opposite. Once you understand the actual mechanics running underneath polite behavior, you stop being confused, stop being blindsided, stop mistaking performance for substance and substance for performance. You start to see people, including yourself, with much more clarity and considerably less judgment. Because almost everything we've discussed today is not a flaw unique to difficult people. It is simply what it means to be a social animal, dressed up every single day in whatever costume the moment requires. The world behind closed doors is not a darker world than the one you already know. It is simply the same world, observed without the polite agreement to look away. That's what this channel is for, and it's where we'll keep going. Conversation after conversation, door after door, for as long as you're willing to keep looking with us.